Right, welcome. I'm Kate. This is my gut health blueprint. This is the protocol or outline that I use when I'm working with people who have got gut issues. And what it really all boils down to is restore function and rebuild tolerance. So, what most people think of as the gut, if we're talking about the gut, is probably something that looks like this. Hopefully happy and smiley, but a lot of people, of course, don't have happy, smiley guts at all. In fact, Australia has the highest search term for gut health in the world. So we must be a nation of people with some concerns for gut. So your digestive system is a step-by-step process. I always think of it as being a little bit like a team. You've got all these individual players that are working cohesively, ideally, for the outcome of good digestion and absorption of nutrients, because that's what our gut is there to do. So step one is the upper digestive tract. So this starts with the mouth. The mouth is two parts of digestion. One, it's the first step of what's called chemical digestion. That's when food is mixing with your saliva, which is full of enzymes. It starts the chemical process of breaking down food. And then we've got the mechanical digestion, the actual crushing of food. The esophagus is just a transport tube. It carries the food from the mouth down into the stomach. And this is the first part of our early signaling. When you put food into your mouth and you start chewing it, it signals to the digestive system downstream that food is on its way and it better get ready. The second part is your stomach. Now, the stomach produces acid. If you've ever had heartburn or reflux, you'll be very aware of that can be actually quite acidic. This is important for sterilization. The stomach acid sterilizes or kills off any microbes that could be coming in from food or water that might otherwise cause an infection. And it's protein digestion. This is where protein starts to get broken down into smaller amino acids. Now, bile is something I think about a lot and probably talk about a lot as well. I feel like it gets overlooked when we're talking about digestive function. Now, the key thing for bile is it's released from the gallbladder when acid enters the small intestine. So if someone doesn't have enough stomach acid, whether they're not making enough of their own or whether they're taking some kind of drug or medication that blocks the production or reduces the production of stomach acid, then the release of bile is likely to be compromised. Now, I'm not saying at all that people should stop taking their acid blocking medication. There are definitely cases where these are really, really important. But clinically, I do think I see people who are taking them perhaps for too long and perhaps unnecessarily. And always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, what's happening downstream if there's not enough acid? So bile is responsible for fat digestion. It helps break down the fat that you're eating, which is essential for being able to absorb things like essential fatty acids, things you might have heard of like omega-3 from fish oil. You need bile to absorb those. You also need bile to absorb your fat-soluble vitamins. Vitamins A, vitamin K, vitamin D, vitamin E are all fat-soluble. Bile is an incredibly important part of detoxification. Now, that's not the subject of today's chat. Perhaps it can be. Perhaps I can do another one about detoxification down the track. Let me know. But when your liver, let me backtrack slightly. So when your body is finished with something, let's say it's used estrogen and it's ready to get rid of it, or you've been taking pharmaceutical medications and the body's getting rid of them, or there's toxins come in from air that you breathe or something you've put in your skin, they get packaged up in the liver. The liver then sends it into the gallbladder, into bile. And that's where the toxins actually leave the body through the bile that goes into the small intestine and exits the body. I'm always saying to people, you haven't detoxed until it's left the body. So bile is essential for that. It's a really important part. And the other part that's really important is motility. Again, something that we probably don't talk about a lot, or I talk about a lot, but a lot of people don't really think about. And that is how the gut moves. So your gut isn't a hollow tube, and things don't move from top to bottom through gravity, of course. The gut actually pushes it through. And bile is the key part of motility in the first part of the gut, the small intestine. So the small intestine is where digestion happens. It's where the breakdown of food happens. So the small intestine is the windy part. If you were to open up the small intestine and spread it out, it has the surface area of a tennis court. So it's enormous. Most of that is due to these little finger-like projections called microvilli, these little kind of fingers that greatly extend the surface area of the small intestine. This is where all the breakdown really of food occurs. And it's where the absorption of nutrients happen. So the whole point of us eating, other than the fact that it's enjoyable or should be enjoyable and pleasurable, of course, is that we need the nutrients. We need the macronutrients. We need things like glucose and amino acids and fats, and we need all the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals that come in with those. The small intestine produces a lot of digestive enzymes. They're what are called brush border enzymes. Some you might be familiar with. One of the better known ones is one called lactase. So if you ever see something that ends in an ASE when you're looking at human biology, it's probably an enzyme. And lactase breaks down lactose. Lactose is the sugar that's found in dairy products. So some people have a genetic predisposition to not making lactase after childhood, which means that their gut doesn't break down lactose, and they'll have a problem with that for life. There's not much we can do about that. Other enzymes, there are enzymes for breaking down sugar and starch and fructose. They should continue to be made after childhood. There are certain situations where people reduce the production of enzymes. A classic is gastro. If someone has an acute gut infection, a gastroenteritis or gut virus, what they might find is that they then develop an intolerance to some foods like lactose or fructose because the small intestine has down-regulated its production of those enzymes. And then the large intestine. This is the big part here. This is to do with water balance. It's where the body absorbs fluid back into the rest of your body, out of the digestive system. It's where the microbiome lives. Microbiome, again, could be in a whole chat, but microbiome is the ecosystem that lives inside us that's made up of predominantly bacteria, but we now know it also includes things like viruses and fungi all living together in the large bowel. And it's where stool is formed, it's where poo is formed. So you might have seen this, the Bristol stool chart. This is an excellent way of describing to your practitioner what is going on with your bowel motions. We rate it from 1 to 7. 1 are the little pellets up here, the little rabbit pellets. And then down the bottom, it's entirely liquid, basically. It's liquid, it's diarrhea. So a perfect poo is this one, number 4. Number 3 is very acceptable as well. If it's going up, if it's getting drier, the transit time's too slow and things are drying out, or if it's coming through as liquid, then it's too quick, it's too fast, too soft. So in summary, the gut is a step-by-step system. It starts at the mouth. I think a lot of people don't take into consideration that the mouth is actually part of your digestive system. It's where it starts. A lot of us are guilty of not chewing our food properly, eating when we're doing something else. One of the clues that I look for when I'm talking to someone is if someone says, oh, yes, I drink lots of water when I eat a meal. I feel like I need to drink lots of water when I'm eating. I will immediately think either they're just dehydrated, they're not drinking enough outside of mealtime, or they're not producing enough saliva. And if they're not producing enough saliva, well, then that's going to affect all the downstream digestion because the body's not getting the sense, that it's not getting the signaling that food's coming in, and you're not getting that first step of digestion occurring. So what the gut needs to function properly. So it's not just organs, it has processes. A big one is the nervous system. We've all heard of fight or flight. We've all heard of sympathetic nervous system. That's the state that most of us are in a lot of the time. So fight or flight is the part of our nervous system that responds to stress. It's when you're working really hard, or you've had a fight with your partner, or no one else on the road knows how to drive properly, whatever it is that triggers your stress response, you're in fight or flight. The counterbalance to fight or flight is what's called parasympathetic nervous system, or rest and digest. And that's exactly what it sounds like. When you're in parasympathetic, you can rest, you can relax, you can sleep well, and you can also digest. Now, the key thing with parasympathetic and sympathetic is that it's an either-or situation. You can't be in a bit of both. So if you are in sympathetic, your digestion is going to be compromised. You're not going to be able to digest your food properly. It's not the right state for effective digestion. And then the digestive secretions, the acid and the enzymes, they signal, they tell the digestive system what's happening, get ready for the next step. The breakdown of food, of course, and then protecting against infection. Bile again, because I think it's so important, massively overlooked when we're thinking about gut health, but we've got that fat digestion. One of the clues that I might think about, or I might look for someone, is if someone says to me they've got really, really dry skin all the time, doesn't matter what kind of moisturizer they put on it, their skin's always dry, I might start thinking that they might have a problem with bile flow, because if you've got poor bile flow, you're not going to absorb fats very well, and our skin needs a lot of fat to help maintain moisture. So I can sometimes see on people's faces when I'm talking to them in a consultation, and I'm asking them, what's your skin like? Is it dry? Is it soft? And they're thinking, I just want to talk about my uncomfortable gut. Why is she talking about my skin? And there's always a reason for this, because what we can see in the rest of the body can sometimes reflect what's actually going on in the gut. Detoxification, super important to have good bile flow, and then the motility aspect as well. So there's no point having great stomach acid and chewing your food really well if the bile flow is not working properly. Things will come to a bit of a grinding halt in that part of your gut. And then motility. Motility really does matter. We have something called the MMC, or migrating motor complex. This is a wave that goes through the digestive system approximately every 90 minutes, maybe 120 minutes, and it just keeps everything moving through. The key thing with the migrating motor complex, though, is it only works when your stomach is empty. So what that means is you have your breakfast, and then 2 hours later, you end up having some morning tea. 2 hours later, you have your lunch. 2 hours later, you have a little snack. 2 hours later, you have another little snack. You've constantly got food in your stomach, which means that the migrating motor complex doesn't get the chance to work properly. And then motility really slows down. So sometimes what we need to do when we identify that motility is a problem is get you to stop snacking. Doesn't mean that you reduce the quantity of food, you can still have proper meals, but not snacking between meals means that the MMC works and things start moving through properly. This is a really important part of things like SIBO, is working on migrating motor complex. Don't worry if you don't know what that is. If you do, you might have been told this. So transit time is a key indicator of motility, how long it takes for something to enter your mouth to exit your body. Normal motility is about somewhere between about, say, 18, 24 hours. If it's a bit longer, a bit slower, not super important. But if you eat a whole lot of sweet corn, and nobody breaks down the skin on sweet corn, we just don't have the right digestive enzymes to do it. So it's really common to see it come out the other end. But if you eat a whole lot of sweet corn and you don't see it come out the other end for 3 days, then we know that your transit time is way too slow. Similarly, if you eat some food and then see it come out 9 hours later, then it's too fast. We want that sweet spot, not too fast, not too slow. One of the clues that I will use that someone's motility might not be great is if someone says to me, I need a cup of coffee to get things moving in the morning, that means motility might be weak. It's pretty common. A lot of people do depend on their morning coffee to get the bowels moving. Doesn't mean it's wrong, and it's okay to do it. I don't have a problem with people drinking coffee, but it probably means that the motility is not working well by itself. And of course, if we don't have if we don't have good motility and the transit time is too slow, our clearance is going to be poor. We now know that if undesirable compounds, toxins, whatever you want to call them, spend too long in contact with the wall of the digestive system, it can lead to problems. It can also lead to us giving the gut time to reabsorb things that your body is trying to get rid of. Our digestive capacity comes down to regulation, it comes down to acid, it comes down to enzymes, it comes down to bile, and it comes down to motility. So if someone has an issue with their digestive system, sometimes it's not always where it's obvious. We might look at motility and go, oh, someone's got terribly slow motility. We'll give them a stimulating laxative. That'll make the bowel spasm and get things out. That will work, but it's not fixing the problem. If the problem is in fact that they've got poor bile flow, fixing that is going to fix the motility. Or starting at the very top, if someone's super stressed and they're not chewing their food properly and they're busy when they're eating, then it doesn't matter what you do downstream. It's going to be about regulation that's the key part. So the gut microbiome, this is probably a word you've heard a lot of. This is very topical at the moment in research and in health. I think of this as an ecosystem. It should be a rainforest. It shouldn't be a field with one crop or one dominant species of bacteria. In a perfect world, the number of bacteria that we should have, if we should have more than 200 different kinds of bacteria in our gut, is considered to be healthy. When I do microbiome testing, it's pretty unusual that I see that. I think the lowest I've seen recently was a lady who had 76 species of bacteria in her gut. She'd been on a lot of antibiotics. So the things that the microbiome do, or the bacteria do in our gut, is they produce certain compounds. So a balanced microbiome will produce a lot of these compounds called short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs. One of the most important short-chain fatty acids is one called butyrate. And this is where we can start to see that the bacteria, we have this lovely commensal relationship with the bacteria. If you eat certain kinds of fiber, the fiber, we can't digest it, we can't break it down ourselves, so it ends up in the large bowel. And certain kinds of bacteria, ones that you've probably heard of called bifidobacterium, do this a lot. They will actually take that fiber and use it as their own source of energy. They use it as their own food and ferment it. And the byproduct of that fermentation is something called butyric acid or butyrate. And then our cells actually use that butyrate as energy. So beautiful commensal, we feed them the fiber, they turn it into butyrate and we have it. Immune regulation is incredibly important. Bacteria help regulate our immune system. If you had to visualize where in your body your immune system is, it's actually just behind the gut wall, just behind the lining of the digestive system. And we now know that the cells of the immune system talk directly to the bacteria and vice versa, which is fascinating. An imbalanced microbiome will be excess gas. People that tend to get a lot of wind, a lot of flatulence, really, it's a sign that there's a problem with the microbiome. An imbalanced microbiome produces a lot of methane. Methane causes problems because it slows down motility. And an imbalanced microbiome will lead to inflammation. So some of the other things that bacteria can produce, they can produce compounds, something called hydrogen sulfide, for instance, can drive inflammation systemically. I see patients with a lot of bacteria that produce hydrogen sulfide, and they're really prone to joint issues. They have a lot of inflammatory joint issues, which is not autoimmunity, but it's actually inflammation being driven by something that the bacteria in the gut are producing. So prebiotics feed the ecosystem. We used to have this idea that we could go in and kill bacteria in the gut. We call that weeding. And then we could seed it. We could just take some probiotics and we'd replace what we'd killed off. You take a course of antibiotics, you take some probiotics, net gain, nothing really changes. And we now know that's not the case. So probiotics, if you take a probiotic supplement, it will exert an effect while you take it. But that bacteria won't repopulate in the gut. If you were to do a microbiome test or a stool test, you'll see it there in the stool results while you're taking it. But if you test it again in a couple of months, it won't be there anymore. So we now know that the way to rebalance that ecosystem, that microbiome, is to feed it. In the same way, if you're a gardener, I'm not, but I understand the premise of it. If you're a gardener and you want your plants to grow up nice, strong, and healthy, you have to nourish the soil. This is what we're doing. We're nourishing the soil. We're giving prebiotics. And so fiber, we talk a lot about fiber. Resistant starch. Resistant starch is a unique kind of starch that's found in things like green banana. It's also really interesting. It's in potatoes, but it's in potatoes that have been cooked, cooled, and reheated. That's when the resistant starch is formed, and that's when you start to feed your gut microbiome. And what our goal is diversity of plants. This is a key tip I really hope you walk away with today, is that we're not looking for perfection. What we're looking for in your diet is diversity in plant foods. So the goal is 30 different plant foods per week. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean 30 serves. If it does, wonderful, but 30 different plants. Plants include your fruit and vegetables, of course, everyone knows that. It also includes legumes. So it might mean adding some lentils to a soup or some chickpeas to a salad. Hummus is made out of chickpeas. That counts as a plant food. It includes nuts and seeds. So some sunflower seeds on a salad or some nut butter of some kind on toast. It includes herbs and spices, fresh herbs in a salad, a beautiful stew or curry made with lots of spices. And it also includes drinks. So by that, I mean herbal teas and even coffee. Coffee is really high in something called polyphenols, which is good for your gut microbiome. Herbal teas like green tea, for instance, again, high in polyphenols, for feeding your gut microbiome. So the goal here is that variety builds resilience. The more bacteria, the different variety of bacteria you have, the more robust your gut microbiome is. If you've only got a low variety of bacteria, there's not going to be the variety of outputs. They're not going to be producing the different range of compounds that different bacteria produce. And then now, why symptoms are so confusing. The key thing here that I'm always thinking about is the symptom is not the cause. So you can have one symptom is not always one cause, and one cause is not always one symptom. Bloating is a classic. Lots of people have bloating. There's many different causes of bloating. There's not just the one thing. So common mistakes that I see in when people are working with gut is removing more foods. And this makes me really sad when I see it. When people have firstly become afraid of food, makes me really sad because food is nourishing. It should be really nurturing and nourishing to our body. I understand why people remove foods. If they start feeling bad when they eat it, of course, the natural inclination is to take it away. But the more foods you remove, the less resilient your gut is becoming. Random supplements, buying something on social media, going to a health food shop and just taking something and hoping that it works. And aggressive protocols. Again, coming back to what I was saying before, I think naturopaths are guilty of this as well, but the idea that you would take lots of antibiotics to kill off a bacteria, and I'm not talking about infections, by the way, that's completely different, but trying to rebalance a gut microbiome by taking antibiotics just seems a bit crazy to me. There are some herbal products, some herbs, that taken in the long term actually start to act like antibiotics. They kill off as many of the good bacteria as they do bad. So we tread gently with the gut microbiome. And The key thing that I'm always thinking about is the common digestive breakdown patterns. So patterns, not labels. A label doesn't tell us anything. I see lots of people who have been given the label IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. Doesn't tell us much. Just tell us that you don't have Crohn's disease, you don't have ulcerative colitis, and you're not celiac. Doesn't tell us what's actually happening. So pattern one is a low acid pattern. So the common features of someone that has low acid is bloating after protein, bloating pretty quickly after protein. So having something high in chicken or high in meat, or people that just say, I just don't eat a lot of high protein foods because I don't feel great when I eat them, might indicate low acid. Reflux or burping. Now, reflux can also be high acid, of course, with one caveat to that. The overproduction of acid is actually pretty rare. Acid getting to the wrong place is much more common. So people with reflux, it is, in my experience, my clinical experience, a sign that acid is getting to the wrong spot. It's getting to the esophagus, not that you're making too much. And so working on keeping it in the stomach is the true fix there. Burping, everyone burps. It's normal to have gas production in the gut, but recurrent burping can indicate that there's fermentation of protein in the stomach. Fatigue after meals. You shouldn't feel tired after a meal. You should feel invigorated by your food. An iron or B12 deficiency. Sometimes iron simply input-output if women are menstruating, but if it's in a non-menstruating woman or a man and there's low iron and they're eating meat, there's probably an absorption issue, probably low acid. Feeling full quickly, the kind of people that go, oh, I'm hungry, I've taken a few mouthfuls of food, and now actually my appetite's gone, and I'm actually feeling nauseous is a classic sign of low acid. So sluggish bile, poor fat tolerance, or nausea after rich meals is a classic. I'll ask people, how do you feel if you eat fish and chips? And if they say, oh no, I never do that because it makes me feel so sick, that's a sign that there's a problem with bile. I've had a question about what happens if you have no gallbladder, and that's a really good question because it can be a problem. So the gallbladder holds bile, and when there is the acid coming through from the stomach, the gallbladder releases the bile in a synchronized way so that you can digest your food. If the gallbladder is removed, there's a couple of things that can happen. Initially, what will happen is bile just drips into the digestive system. Typically, that will look like what we call bile acid diarrhea, when someone starts getting really loose bowel motions because bile's getting into the large intestine where it's not meant to be and triggering irritation. It can lead to even worse tolerance to fatty foods and rich meals because there's no gallbladder to release enough bile. And so people will develop a lot of nausea, they can get diarrhea. I see people develop problems with detoxification when they don't have a gallbladder, again, because the bile's just kind of dripping out all the time and not getting a controlled release. There are things that we can do. It's not the end of good digestion for you. There are certainly some things that we can do. But for a lot of people, it's not as smooth, perhaps as surgeons would have you believe, having the gallbladder removed. I understand some people have to have them removed because they're full of stones and that could be even worse. But it can be a problem for digestion for sure. Pale or floating stools. I've had patients tell me that they see an oil slick on the top of the toilet water after eating rich food. And that's the kind of thing that could happen without a gallbladder as well, because it just goes through you. It's not getting digested. And constipation. If you don't have good bile flow and you're losing that trigger to motility, then constipation is much more likely. Again, just dipping into SIBO. Bile is actually a detergent for the small intestine. It helps wash out any bacteria that might have made their way up there. So if you don't have good bile flow, you're more likely to develop something called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which is exactly what it sounds like. The small intestine is normally fairly sterile in certain conditions. Bacteria grow there, overgrow there. And when they do that, they cause a lot of fermentation. So people get a lot of wind and distension, bloating, changes bowels. Anyway, that can be very much linked to poor bile. And then PMS or hormonal symptoms. If you're unable to detox hormones effectively through the liver and through bile, then you're going to have some imbalances develop. An enzyme insufficiency pattern, bloating soon after eating, undigested food in the stool. We don't digest corn or tomato skin or things like nuts and seeds. So it's pretty common to see those. But if there's anything else, either you're not chewing properly or eating too quickly, or you're not making enough digestive enzymes. Gas, regardless of what kind of food you're eating, that just that constant feeling that you're got a little microbrewery going on in your gut and producing lots of gas the whole time. And feeling heavy after meals, that could be stomach too, but that feeling of just everything sitting in your gut, people will tell me that they feel like food just sits there. And nutrient deficiencies. If you're not making enough digestive enzymes, food's not getting broken down properly, you're not getting the goodness out of it. No point in having a perfect diet if there's a problem in how your body's actually accessing the nutrients in it. And then small intestinal irritation, so food reactions, people that start reacting to things like gluten, not celiac, it's a bit different, but suddenly someone's reacting to gluten, or they're suddenly not able to eat fruit, or sugar makes them super bloated. Food reactions, food intolerances, unless someone's had it their whole life, like I was saying, with an inability to produce lactase and break down lactose, unless someone's had it their whole life, I'm always thinking, what's changed? What's happened along the way that your gut no longer tolerates this food? And if we can unravel that and get to the bottom of what the change was, then there's a very good chance that we can put the food back in once we've fixed it. Post-meal discomfort. And by that, it really means something called visceral hypersensitivity. So visceral refers to your viscera, your guts. And hypersensitivity, of course, means they're super sensitive. So this is an issue that can develop when the nerves in the gut become super sensitive. And that person will become acutely reactive or acutely sensitive to what is happening in their digestive system. So ordinarily, we all get a bit of bloating when there's some food in our gut and we don't even notice it, we don't feel it. For someone who has visceral hypersensitivity, it can be uncomfortable or even painful when there's a little bit of wind or a little bit of bloating or a little bit of distension in the digestive system. And that comes from visceral hypersensitivity. That's pretty common in people with SIBO. And it's a kind of keystone indicator of IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, that people get a lot of pain from normal movements in the gut. Again, it tells us what's happening. It doesn't tell us why, though. You've always got to keep thinking, getting to the bottom of the why. And small intestine irritation, loose stools, or alternating bowels. And histamine intolerance. Histamine intolerance can come about through a lack of digestive enzymes as well. There's an enzyme called DAO that helps break down histamine. People can genetically be poorer at producing that. Or people can have an overgrowth of bacteria in their small intestine, the SIBO that I mentioned, that is triggering a lot of histamine to be produced in the gut itself, which means that they become more intolerant to histamine foods. And then impaired motility. So constipation, of course, if things aren't moving through properly or fast enough, you'll get constipated. Bloating that increases during the day, waking up flat, looking 6 months pregnant by night. Relief after a bowel motion is often a sign that there's a problem with motility. A history of antibiotics is a clue. That doesn't mean a one-off course 5 years ago, but people that have been on antibiotics repeatedly over a period of time, the damage that's caused to the microbiome can have a big impact on motility. And recurrent SIBO. I'm always thinking patterns over labels. Labels don't really tell us unless it's a disease, which is not, that's different. But if it's a symptom, it doesn't tell us what's going on. So you can have the same symptom with different drivers, or different drivers, same driver, but different symptoms. So digestion isn't one size fits all. Capacity matters. And by that, I mean, firstly, genetics influence our capacity. So genes are our predisposition. They're not our destiny, unless it's a genetic disease, which is not what I deal in. The kind of genetics I'm looking at are things like your detox pathways, your enzyme production, the barrier, the gut barrier, which is how well the gut was responding um, to infections and bacteria and food, bile production, and something called host microbiome signaling, which sounds very technical. But what this refers to is this fascinating gene, which is called FUT2, FUT2. Your FUT2 status determines whether you're a secretor or a non-secretor. 80% of people are secretors, 20% are non-secretors. And what we're talking about in secretion, what that secretion is this compound called 2-fucosal lactose. Don't worry about biochemical names. It's known as 2FL. If you ever see that, that's what it means. 2FL is a unique kind of sugar that your gut secretes to feed bacteria. The one I mentioned earlier, bifidobacterium, for instance, loves 2FL. So most people produce this sugar that feeds the bacteria, that releases the butyrate, and we have this lovely kind of commensal relationship. 20% of people don't make that sugar. They're the non-secretors. So people who are non-secretors tend to have a slightly different microbiome than people that are. And the good news is these days we can actually get 2FL as a supplement. So if you're a non-secretor, it's a pretty easy fix to just take that supplement. So when we're looking at what's happening with someone's gut, we look at the capacity and the load. So the capacity is someone's genetic capacity. What are their genes telling us their load is like? Are they a non-secretor? That means that their ability to make that 2FL is likely to be lower. What's their environmental load like? Are there a lot of toxins coming into the gut? What's their stress like? Dietary stress. Is there enough food? Is there enough fiber? Is there good nutrients coming in? Is someone eating a lot of ultra-processed foods that's causing stress on the digestive system? And then there's the microbial burden. Is there enough good bacteria to keep the bad ones or the less desirable ones in check? When load exceeds capacity, that's when symptoms appear. And this is the keystone of how I think about gut health and how I actually really think about any kind of issue, whether it's energy or hormones or whatever it is that somewhere along the line, assuming someone's been well up to a point, somewhere along the line, the load has exceeded the capacity. And we just have to unravel that to make it work again. So healing the gut, restoring capacity. So calm before repair. There is little point in coming in and giving someone some high-tech probiotics if their stress levels are up to here. I don't know about you, but when I'm stressed, my brain tells me to eat salt and vinegar chips. It doesn't tell me to eat broccoli. There'd be no point me taking a really good probiotic. There'll be little point in me taking a really good probiotic and thinking that's going to help a lot until I get my stress levels back under control. So regulate the nervous system, reduce inflammatory load, and stabilize eating patterns. And that doesn't mean putting a lot of pressure onto someone. I'm really conscious of what people are capable of when they're stressed. Eating salt and vinegar chips for a week is not going to kill anybody, but it's not going to fix anything in the long term. Restore the top of the chain. Always be thinking about the order in which your digestive system is working. So support acid. Are you chewing properly? Are you giving your stomach enough notification that food is on its way and it needs to start making acid? We optimize enzymes and we improve bile flow. Again, good old gallbladder. We enhance motility. We space out meals, give that migrating motor complex a chance to work, and we support clearance. Supporting the ecosystem, increase diversity of food, feed the beneficial species, give them the fibers that they need, and target overgrowth only when needed. And then finally, we rebuild tolerance. We expand food variety then. We reintroduce strategically. I have an order in which I like to reintroduce foods if people have been off them for a while. And we increase fiber gradually. I know on social media there's a trend called fiber maxing, which is wonderful. We should all eat more fiber. But if you go from a low fiber diet to a high fiber diet really quickly, your gut is not going to feel good. So the healing sequence, we regulate, we get the nervous system right, we restore function, we restore flow, we rebuild diversity, and then we expand tolerance. So a case study, I'm just keeping an eye on the time, we might only do one today. A mid-40s female, she had bloating, constipation, bad PMS, terrible brain fog, and was developing a large range of food sensitivities. And she was always, well, she was tired most of the time, but post-meal fatigue was really noted. So she'd been told she had IBS. Now that's good because she'd had a colonoscopy and we'd ruled out other things. We knew she didn't have a disease. She'd been told she had a hormone imbalance. Yep, she had PMS. And she'd been told she had food intolerances. All labels, but none of these things are telling us. These are the what is happening. They're not the whys. So the clinical clues for her is that she was chronically stressed. She had a job she hated, a lot going on in her life. She was chronically stressed. She was constantly doing low-fat dieting. Fat is how your body makes bile. If you're not eating enough fat, your bile can't work properly. That's going to cause problems with the digestive system. She had poor fat tolerance and she had very pale stools. So we look here for the pattern, not the label. Because of her stress, low stomach acid. She wasn't taking the time to chew properly. Her diet wasn't fantastic. The low-fat diet and the low stomach meant low bile flow, leading to hormone imbalance and impaired motility. So what we did, the intervention, was regulate her nervous system, work out some strategies to calm her nervous system down, support stomach acid. Now, I don't use a lot of supplements for this. Some people take betaine hydrochloric acid as a supplement to replace their stomach acid. You can do that if you really need it, but it's a band-aid. It's not actually getting to the root cause. Stimulating bile and restoring motility, keeping in mind always restoring the function and then rebuilding tolerance. I'll talk through this one quickly. This was an early 30s male. Bloating during the day, that flash in the morning, 6 months pregnant at night, constipation, strong gas. I always ask people if their gas is offensive smelling. Brain fog and low mood. And actually, I should just mention here, always keep in mind that what's going on in the gut's going on in the rest of the body as well. It's not an isolated organ per se. If there's something wrong in the gut, then you'll feel it everywhere. Low mood and increasing food sensitivities, that's always a sign. It's not normal to not tolerate a lot of different foods. So surface labels, again, similar. He'd been told he had IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. He'd been told he had food intolerances, yep, and he had stress-related symptoms, all very, very true, but they're the what is happening, not the why. So the clinical clues here is the bloating increasing during the day, a relief after a bowel movement, constipation dominant, and he had a history of antibiotics. So again, we look at the pattern, we don't look at the label. So if we just said, oh, you've got IBS, oh, you better go on a low FODMAP diet, it would have just made things worse for him in the long term. So impaired motility, he had an overgrowth of methane-producing bacteria, something that would be called IMO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, makes the gut really slow and sluggish, and low microbial diversity. Because of the antibiotics, he just didn't have the right species of bacteria. So restoring the motility, increasing the fiber gradually, targeted prebiotics. I did a microbiome test on him, so I knew which bacteria needed to be fed. And that's the key. If you can see the species are still there, but they just don't have enough food, we can say, well, eat these 6 foods or take these particular fibers and they'll grow. A short antimicrobial phase to lower the methane. And then rebuild diversity. So again, always coming back to this idea, restored function, rebuild tolerance. So different drivers, same blueprint. So case 1, the acid, the bile and motility. Case 2 was the motility and the microbiome. So foods that support digestive function. Food is medicine, as they say. Food is signaling. So bitter plants. Bitter is actually really interesting. So we've got bitter taste buds in our mouth. We've actually got them throughout our whole digestive system. They stimulate bile, they stimulate acid and improves digestive signaling. So having bitter foods. Polyphenols, which I've mentioned a few times, they're the pigments in food. So blueberries are so-called superfoods because of their polyphenols. These feed bacteria, reduce inflammation, and help improve the integrity of the gut wall. Prebiotic fibers we've spoken about a little bit, feeding the bacteria, making them produce the short-chain fatty acids that suit us. And always coming back to this diversity over perfection. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to have a lot of diversity. So practical takeaways: slow down, breathe, sit to eat and chew well. If you're feeling super stressed, don't eat. It's better to fast a little bit. You'll feel better if you don't eat. Or if you do need to eat when you're super busy or super stressed, eat something that's almost partially digested already, like soup. That puts very little pressure on your digestive system. You'll get lots of good nutrients out of it. Don't sit down and eat a steak if you're super stressed. That's not going to end well. Support bile and enzymes. Bitters, I use a lot of bitter herbs in practice because they're so fantastic at getting everything working well. You can include bitters in terms of diet. Don't fear healthy fats. You need fat in your digestive system for making bile. And the constant snacking. If you're feeling like you constantly need to eat, be thinking, is it head hunger or belly hunger? If it's head hunger, it's stress. If it's belly hunger, you need to be eating bigger meals. Respect fiber tolerance. Do it gradually. Ideally match the fiber to motility. We go very slowly. If you're one of the people that if you try and increase fiber and your gut gets slower, then there is a problem of motility that needs to be addressed. And what not to waste money on: random supplements. Maybe sometimes you'll hit the jackpot and you'll take something and it'll work really well. Fantastic. Aggressive or long-term restriction. If I put someone on a restricted diet, it is only ever temporary. I see patients that have put themselves on low FODMAP diets, for instance, and they've been on them for years, which was never the objective of that diet, for instance, and complex protocols without foundation. When to seek help: if you've had unintentional weight loss, persistent blood in the stool, severe pain, or there's ongoing nutrient deficiency, you need to have further investigations done. And then finally, this is the blueprint. So the base of the pyramid is regulation. It's about making sure the nervous system is regulated. The digestive system just can't work unless it is. Upstream function: your stomach acid, your digestive enzymes, and your bile. Motility, can't emphasize that one enough. Again, that's something probably equal to bile in importance. And then the microbial balance, making sure that you've got good diversity, that all the bacteria have got the food that they need. And then finally, we'll have the resilience. We have that ability to expand our diet and enjoy food again. And I've had a question: how do you measure 2FL? Coming back to that 2-fucosal lactose. I'm not aware that you can measure 2FL per se, but you can certainly measure FOOT2. The genetic test that I use certainly looks at FOOT2. So we can do that test and have a look and see whether you're an excretor or non-secretor. Okay, I think that's all we've got time for. If you've got any questions that I haven't answered, or you've got any questions that come to mind, please shoot me an email. I'm always happy to answer any questions. If you're interested in working with me, jump onto the website. You can see how I work as a practitioner and my consultations. If you haven't already signed up to my newsletter, I send out a weekly newsletter talking a lot about digestive health, about DNA, and all these kinds of principles for getting you feeling well again. All right, well, thank you very much. I hope you found this helpful and hope to speak to everyone soon.